Hi, Ellie.
Hi, Phil.
Welcome. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and also what do you do at BGU?
Okay, yeah, so I'm Ali Riley. I'm the programme leader of the BA Honours Early Childhood Studies at Bishop Grosseteste. So prior to that, I was a teacher. I was a teacher in Lincoln for about 16 years and then fell upon the job at Bishop Grosseteste. I originally worked on the foundation degree for teaching assistants and then moved over to the Early Childhood Studies course. I've been in that now for about 10 years.
Okay, so the reason why we're having this conversation today is because I wanted to speak with you about a book that you've recently published. And so I wonder if you can just give us a bit of an overview of what that book is about.
Okay, so it's a book about how educational theories can help us to understand the things that are going on in the world at the moment. So it actually builds on two books that we previously wrote, which are about education theories and how practitioners might use those theories in everyday practice. But then we felt actually, because a lot of these theories are quite old, it's really sort of thinking and understanding how, while they may be dated when they were originally written, we can actually apply them to what's happening in the world because they still have value there. So I work with a partner who I used to actually work with on the foundation degree, and we sort of co-authored the book, and we identified some of the sort of what we saw as being some of the, I guess, the challenging issues that are happening in the world today and how we can better understand them through our application theories.
Mm. So how important is theory actually in shaping practice?
I think it's really important. I think certainly as a teacher, I guess until I started working at Bishop Grosseteste and I was teaching theories, I didn't think I did theory. So, I was everyday practice and you were doing certain things, behaviour management, for example, beads in jars, giving children stickers. These were just things that we did. Coming to Bishop Grosseteste and teaching students about theory, suddenly I had that kind of light bulb moment of, oh gosh, I was doing Skinner, or, we have a national curriculum and it's built around sort of Piaget's ages and stages. So I think it's really important that we don't forget that a lot of what we do today are underpinned by these theories. We may well have sort of forgotten because they were done in a dim and distant past when we did our degrees at university, but actually I think it's really important that we understand that, because if you like, as I say, it's that light bulb moment. It sort of suddenly everything that we do makes sense, and it can really help us to understand why we do the things that we do in terms of children, what makes children tick, why they do the things that they do. So I think it's really important.
Could you give me an example? Because I totally agree with you. Like when you are in practice, sometimes you forget that you are doing things that are actually underpinned by theories. And so I think it's very easy for practitioners to think, well, actually, I don't need to know theories, or I don't do theories.
Yeah.
So for those people who are thinking exactly that, could you give us an example in terms of like, how does it actually shape our practice?
Yeah, so I mentioned Skinner. I think after corporal punishment was abolished in settings, I think we suddenly had this, okay, how do we manage behaviour? Because there was no longer this sort of threat of what might happen. So I think settings had to be creative in terms of how they manage behaviour. There was also a much greater emphasis on positive behaviour management. So, we are rewarding. So this is operant conditioning. B.F. Skinner talked about, you reward the positive behaviour. We use negative reinforcement to stop the behaviours that you don't want. So I think Skinner is one that teachers will find that they're using all day, every day in their classroom management. But then on top of that, we can then draw from the work of Albert Bandura. So he talked about role modelling. So, every time you say, to a group of children, oh, look at little Johnny, he's sitting so nicely, and all the other children sort of sit up, there is sort of social learning theory right there. So I think, yeah, we're absolutely using these things all the time. Vygotsky, he talked about the zone of proximal development and this notion of having that support and taking children to just outside their comfort zone. Teaching assistants working with children, that's the zone of proximal development. That's that knowledgeable other who's supporting children. you know, when we differentiate work, we're using scaffolding again, Vygotsky, and then ultimately the work of Jerome Brunner was sort of this notion of supporting children scaffolding their work. So it's happening all the time.
What would you see as the limitations for applying theories in practice?
I think, as I said previously, what we have to do and what we have to make sure we're doing is thinking about when some of these theories were developed and what the education system and what children were like at that time. There certainly had to be some thinking about bringing these things up to speed. Piaget, for example, when he developed his ages and stages, children are a lot different today. You know, they progress so much faster, they're a lot more developed. And of course the other limitations about the theories are the sort of the critiques of the theories. You know, Piaget heavily criticised for working with only a small sample of children that couldn't be generalised, a small sample from a very sort of white middle class background as well. So I think we have to sort of acknowledge that they were of a time, and they were also of a period of working with a particular group of children, and perhaps, you know, not the sort of diversity and range of children that we have today.
What theory would you pick as the most useful for a practitioner right now who's working in education?
As I say, I don't think you can go beyond sort of behaviour theories, either, as I say, social learning theory or the operant conditioning that Skinner introduced, simply because I think behaviour is one of the most challenging things that sort of practitioners have to deal with today. I know that practitioners are leaving education because, you know, behaviour is an issue. It is a challenge for practitioners. So I think just having those resources and those sort of things at their disposal is so important, that I talk about it of having sort of weapons in your arsenal, different ways to apply to different types of behaviour. You know, when you think about children who have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, when you think about children who have are on the autistic spectrum, again, Skinner's work has underpinned some of those sort of behaviour management strategies that we use with children with complex needs, those sort of neurodivergent children who perhaps don't respond in the way that other children might. So that's sort of the looking at the antecedent, the behaviour, the consequence. These are all sort of applied techniques that we use to manage behaviour, but again, have their foundations in the behaviourist theories and in those social learning theories.
It's one thing learning about theories. I suppose when it comes to application, it gets a bit more complicated. And so just to kind of delve a little bit deeper regarding that sort of, you know, when it comes to the application of it, what advice would you give someone who's trying to apply learning theories in their practice?
I think I've always said to my students, particularly those ones who are going into initial teacher training or working with young children, there isn't a magic wand. You know, the theories are there, and they give us a better understanding of how children behave and what children do. But there is no one size fits all. So again, I think it's taking aspects of this work, but then adapting it and making it flexible to a particular situation. I mean, I came, my first setting was a little village school. We didn't really have challenging or difficult behaviour. When I moved to my next school, which was a more challenging school, it was in a sort of city setting. And it was almost like, gosh, I've forgotten how to teach. You know, what's happening here? And you've got to really sort of draw on everything that you know. I think the other thing, of course, is getting an understanding of why children are behaving. I think we tend to try and sort of fix the problem as it faces us immediately, but actually we need to dig much deeper into that in terms of, okay, what's happened in this child's life? And here we can then draw from, for example, Bowlby's attachment theory. You know, has something happened in this child's life that actually is making them behave in this particular way? Because actually there's so much more happening deep inside. You know, you can only ever see the surface, like the iceberg analogy, isn't it, where you can only see what's happening on the surface. But I think what theories do is help us to dig much deeper into, okay, this is the behaviour that's presenting itself, this is the learning that's behaving itself, or the learning challenge that's presenting itself. Let's just dig deep and try and work out what is going on. You know, are there some attachment issues? You go again to look at the work of Erik Erikson, for example, and sort of the impact of sort of the parenting on perhaps how children are responding. So there's all sorts of reasons why children present in the way that they do, and I think theories can really help us to understand that. But there's no quick fix. I think, you know, you draw from lots of things, but having the knowledge of those theories really kind of helps you to understand and apply and then act.
There seems to be a big focus on behaviour at the moment, as you've mentioned. I'm just wondering if you have a theory as to why behaviour is such an issue right now.
I don't know. I think if I did, I'd probably be making my millions. Maybe. I think it's easy to blame. It's easy to blame the parents. It's easy to blame the settings. It's easy to blame society as a whole. I think children are changing, and you know, there's so much exposure now to things like social media. They're a lot more canny. They see things, they know things. They're not as, I guess, innocent and naive as perhaps they used to be. So I think going hand in hand with that is it will sort of display itself in the challenges that they're experiencing and feeling. And I think some of it is probably an outlet to what's happening. They know so much more. I mean, they see things all the time through sort of social media and through, you know, watching things on TV. That I don't think that children are protected in the way that they used to be, perhaps, because there's so much exposure to what's going on in the world, and I think that's going to impact on behaviour and how they feel about themselves. You know, we're encouraging, rightly so, children to talk about sort of their feelings and sort of mental health problems and challenges and difficulties, and I think if we encourage that, which I think we should be doing, we've also got to deal with the consequences of that, and again having that sort of understanding and appreciation for what life is like as a child today.
So if children are changing quickly, would you say the theories or the mainstream theories that we have been learning about are still relevant, or are they quickly getting out of date?
No, I think they are still relevant. As I said earlier, I think so long as we recognise where they're coming from and we adapt accordingly. But fundamentally, I think there's still, I mean, Maslow, for example, you know, he talked about this hierarchy of needs that, you know, we start with this sort of triangle. We've got the sort of the base needs at the bottom, which children need to develop and to just set them up. And then right at the pinnacle of that, we've got this notion of sort of self-esteem and being the best version of yourself that you can be. But what Maslow would say is, unless you've got the sort of the basic needs at the bottom of the pyramid, which he talked about as being food, water, you know, safety, belonging, that a child's got to feel comfortable in their skin before they can go on and reach that sort of highest pinnacle of where they could be. And very few do reach that sort of self-actualization. I mean, I'm certainly not self-actualized. There's plenty to go at. But it's that feeling comfortable in your own skin and having all of the things that set you up. Now, I would argue that perhaps those base needs have perhaps moved and changed. Again, Maslow was writing, he was, you know, he referred to himself, he was a little Jewish boy sort of stuck in Brooklyn, America. Very difficult childhood he had and didn't feel particularly loved by his parents. So he was writing from the perspective of somebody who didn't feel loved and who didn't feel safe in the area that he lived. I think our children come from very different backgrounds now, so their actually safety and belonging needs might be very different. I mean, I laugh with my students because I say one of the things now that Maslow would never have thought of, the first thing we look for when we go into a new place, what's the Wi-Fi code? Because, you know, we need to be connected and we need to remain connected. There's this sort of fear of missing out, this FOMO. So actually those needs change, but essentially it's the same, because once we've got that and I've got the Wi-Fi, I'm connected, I know where I am, then we can start to sort of to move on and feel comfortable. So again, fundamentally, the principle is there. It's just perhaps the needs change. And again, we have to look at where children are growing up. You know, a child who's currently, you know, growing up in the Far East is going to have very different needs to children growing up in most of England.
So you mentioned the word connected there. I read in your book an interesting term, connectivism. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
It is. So again, you talked about, you know, are the theories still relevant today? And I think the chapter of my book there is actually taking the theories and understanding how they have been applied to this notion of connectivism. Technology is something that isn't going to go away. It's something that we live with, and actually has many fundamental benefits. I think we all saw through COVID how important it was to have that connection, either with family and friends or just from an educational perspective. So again, these theories underpin the sort of approach through connectivity. So if we go back to behaviorism, we're talking there about this very simple, children put something in and they get an immediate response. Interestingly enough, Skinner actually developed something very similar. Obviously, didn't have the technology that we have today, but he was very keen on this idea of having, he called it a teaching machine. And the idea was that children input the information and they get an immediate response, because he kind of looked and in a school setting, when his daughter went to school, in a school setting, he found that actually the children were doing the work. They didn't get any feedback on their work until the day after, or even sometimes the following week. And he was like, well, do you know what, this isn't really good enough, because they make a mistake. By the time they come to rectify the mistake, we've kind of moved on. So his idea was to have this immediate, they put the information in, out comes a response, they can rectify that or they can move on. That's very similar to a lot of the IT products that we're using in settings today. So, you know, we might sit children at a computer or at a tablet, they put, you know, they answer a question to a song, immediately they get sort of stars and, you know, banners, or, you know, try again. So that's behaviorism. But equally, when you think about constructivism, which was the work of both Piaget and Vygotsky, if you think about searching for something through Google, looking for some information, what the computer is doing is making those connections. Social media, it's about connections, and it's about, you know, oh, I found something that you might be interested in, because what's happening there is it's connecting that information. That's constructivism. It's sort of building that information. It's encouraging children to do the same. So we might call it rabbit holes. You know, they put something in and then something else comes out, and it takes their thinking and their learning in completely different directions. So again, that is constructivism, from the learning about and making those connections between different concepts and constructs.
That's really interesting. Do you think Skinner would have been a fan of AI?
Oh, is anybody? I don't know. Yes, I think the thing about Skinner is he saw opportunities in everything. He was a fascinating man. I mean, he was not well received in America, because this idea that actually he could sort of shape how people behave was completely against that ideal of, you know, free will that Americans are obviously so proud of. But he embraced, you know, he saw things and he looked for opportunities. So I think he would have embraced AI and would have found a use for it.
Yeah, because it just reminded me of, you know, the idea of a super teacher who can give you instant feedback that is like good quality to every student in the room, and it could be really bespoke. So it kind of sounds a bit like, you know, the teaching machine that you mentioned.
Yeah. It could be, but then again, I think what we don't want to do is to replace one thing with another. There's got to be some sort of interaction and engagement. I mean, I have nothing against AI. I think if used in the right way, but what we don't want are people just putting things in, getting stuff out, and then not even engaging with it. You know, I think certainly I'll be honest, I've used it myself, not for writing my books, which I put that straight out there. But you know, if I'm thinking about creative activities to do with the students, discussion titles and things like that, you know, I've put in information into ChatGPT. It's thrown stuff out there, but I think it will be foolish just to use that without actually considering, is this actually relevant? Is it doing what I wanted it to do? And tweaking and amending that. And I think that's what we have to teach children. It's about, I mean, I can remember when, this is how old I am. I can remember when computers were first introduced into settings. I can remember when, you know, Wikipedia was sort of the thing, and children would, you know, be coming and they'd just be sort of giving me the homework, which was from Wikipedia. And it's kind of, well, great, you've used a resource here, but you've got to engage with that resource. And I think part of our job as teachers is to teach children to engage with whatever's in vogue at the moment and make it their own and to take ownership of it. Because as I say, there's no quick fixes, there's no magic wand. And I think children need to learn that as well, that actually you can't just put that into your work, you've got to show your understanding of it. So again, this goes back to that sort of the pedagogy and how we can sort of take that and teach children to behave responsibly with it, so it's part of their learning experience.
Okay, so as you kind of already mentioned anyway, you know, not everybody is Skinner's biggest fan, and I'm just wondering, what would you say to his biggest critic about behaviorism and the value it has in education?
Well, I mean, I think I would say it's tried and tested. I think you go into any setting, particularly sort of primary settings, and people are using operant conditioning. That's what, well, you know, like it or not, like the principle of it or not, we are having to find ways to be creative. I mean, I was a governor in a secondary EBD school, and they actually very challenging behaviours there. They used a token system, so the children were actually given credits which turned into Argos vouchers, which a lot of them used to buy the Christmas presents or birthday presents for family members. That, I mean, Skinner's original work was a token system of sort of, as I recall, it was working in special needs or social care sort of setting, and it was using that sort of token system to modify behaviour. So I think the other thing, as I say to my students, is you can be as critical of it as you like, but it's children don't need it forever. You know, we as practitioners recognise when actually some pupils don't need it as much as other pupils. Eventually some pupils won't need it at all. So I think we shouldn't be just using these things without really thinking about the impact of them. You know, I say to my students, I don't have to manage their behaviour because people have already done that. So they come to me already knowing how to behave, but they've actually been taught that, been shown that their behaviour has been modified in their sort of primary teaching, secondary teaching, so that once, and that's, to me, that's our job as teachers. Part of our job is to turn out young people who can take their place in society and know how to behave accordingly in society. So let's face it, we do work a tokenist system, you know.
Yeah. Okay. One of the chapters in your book is education as a vehicle for social mobility. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
I can. I mean, this essentially came from my doctoral thesis. I became very interested in what motivated young people to go to university. Obviously, the course I started on, the foundation degree, was a response to Tony Blair's education, the sort of the 50% of young people should have higher education, should have a degree. And it just kind of got me thinking about why young people, what motivates young people, and that sort of sent me into sort of looking at the work of people like Basil Bernstein and Pierre Bourdieu, and this sort of notion of, if you educate people, it gives them that opportunity to, if you like, to come out of the poverty trap. You know, I think as I say to my students, education opens doors. And we have a lot of first generation students on our course, so families who've never been to university, and this is their opportunity, and it just gives them, I think it gives them that sort of sense of confidence, back to that sort of self-esteem, and that ability to sort of go out into the world and to do things that perhaps they wouldn't do without having the sort of education. But what I also found was that we've still got in this country, quite a sort of separate systems of education, although we're not quite in sort of the realms of Bourdieu and sort of the class system that he was writing about. We still have those sort of pockets of, some settings are viewed as and seen as better than others, and where you're educated makes a huge difference in terms of outcomes. So yeah, it just kind of got me thinking about how we use education and the message that it gives to young people. And as I say, I just genuinely think that, I'm a firm believer in education. I've been in education all my life, and I just think it's such a powerful thing to just give young people that sort of that confidence to go out into the wide world and to achieve what they can, should be able to. I don't think that somebody's background, their sort of social standing should hold them back from doing what they want to do.
So my question really is, to what extent can it really transform social mobility, given what we have, as in like from a more pragmatic or realistic perhaps point of view? Can it really transform someone's social mobility by accessing the education system that they have access to?
I think it can, but I also, it did sort of sadden me a little bit, because I think when they opened up the sort of higher education sector and tried to encourage more people to go, I think fundamentally what we saw, and perhaps are still seeing, is almost a bipartite system of education. So you've got your sort of Russell Group universities, and then I guess you've got your post-92 universities, and young people are still, again, from my reading and from my own research, are kind of visualizing themselves in, the Russell Group university isn't for me. Again, it's back to Bourdieu and this notion of the fish out of water, and actually I feel much more comfortable in a post-1992 university, and that is absolutely fine. Again, I'm a firm believer in, you go where you are happy. I think what needs to be seen is, from an employer's perspective, this sort of better understanding of, post-1992 universities do a damn good job, and those degrees are, should be equivalent to what a student's getting at a Russell Group university. And unfortunately, in some sectors, that's still not being seen. So we still see, in some sectors, they're still sort of hunting for, Russell Group graduates and almost looking down on the post-1992 degrees. And it shouldn't be like that, because, we have quality standards across the board. So it shouldn't make a difference, but sadly it still does. Having said that, I'm sorry,
No.
I do think that engaging in the degree and engaging in the study and getting the degree it's empowering, and I do think it is encouraging people to go and seek out perhaps careers and things that they wouldn't normally. Obviously, I think the other sad thing is, of course, the change of government. We have a government now who doesn't actually value, some of the degrees that are being offered, that they're actually the widening participation agenda encouraged. So certainly the degree that I teach on, early childhood studies, which was one that was designed to capture what at the time was widening participation, and is now, of course, that APP, actually is almost seen by the current government as one that could be replaced by degree apprenticeships or even level 3 qualifications. So I just think that we've had a government that hasn't really committed to that Labour government vision of, allowing people and encourage people to go to university and valuing those degrees.
Okay, so if there is still such a divide between, the Russell Group universities and, those which are not Russell Group universities, and also the expectations from employers that, anybody that they want to employ would need to have a degree, for example. So would you not say that's almost like a relabeling of qualifications, if you like, where things actually are very similar to how things used to be in terms of, like, most people who have access to the real higher education would be like those people who are in a particular position, and others who don't have access to it would basically be the same as, like, back then, finishing college or finishing school, because you wouldn't need a degree to go to get a job, if you go far back enough. So to what extent do you think it is more like a relabeling rather than a real transformation in terms of social mobility?
I think it is a relabeling, and that saddens me. And I think it's not in the spirit of how it was intended. And I guess that's what happens when you have sort of change of government. I think the other thing, of course, is you've got to factor in what's been happening over the past sort of 5 years, and priorities change and priorities are different. But yeah, sadly, I do think it's a relabeling. But equally, I also think you can't take away. I mean, I look at my students when they graduate. As I say, a lot of my students have come from non-traditional backgrounds. They're often the first in the family. I don't think you can take that achievement away from them. And again, I think part of it really is just about celebrating the achievement and letting them see what they can do with that. I have students who I'm not clever enough to be a teacher. I'm not, and actually, if we can encourage them and say, you know what, you've just done 3 years, you've got a degree. This is real commitment. It's something that you should be really proud of. Then we're sort of feeding into that. Yeah, okay, you can now do a PGC. You can go on to further studies. So I've had students who've gone on the back of this degree. They've gone on to sort of social work. They've gone on to sort of therapy roles, really making a huge difference. And I think sometimes we have to think, this is not always about the person who makes the most money or the person who gets the most prestigious jobs. It's about the difference that they can make in the jobs that they have qualified to do and are doing. And I think that's that repositioning of, you get a degree not because of particularly about prestige and so on, but actually you can get a better job than you would have done. It opens up doors for you, gives you options, but it's also that sort of sense of accomplishment and achievement. I don't think we should take that away.
What do you think of the idea of meritocracy?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? I sort of was in favour of the grammar school, and I just felt that we had a tripartite system of education. We had the grammar school, we had the secondary modern, and then we had the tech schools, which of course didn't really sort of last. And I think people should have options, and I think that they should go in the place that best fits. There'll always be a place and a need for people who do manual skills, plumbers, electricians, builders. We need them, and those people who aren't necessarily academically gifted, they are the people that we need to hold up our economy. Really, we couldn't be without them. And equally, there will be people academically who are taking the other positions, but I don't think that your sort of social standing, your background should reflect where you go. I think it should totally be done on what you're capable, what you're able to do, and what you want to do. I think what's happened, and it certainly was my experience, obviously Lincolnshire still has grammar schools. My experience was, those parents who were paying for their children to get special support and special help to help them to pass the 11 plus. I disagree with that, because I just feel that those children who've had that extra support will not necessarily thrive in a grammar school, and actually that they probably would have been much better in a better paced, comprehensive specialist school academy. And I think it's wrong that people who can pay for the best education are the children who are getting the best education. Again, it's back to that sort of social networks. It's you know, who you know rather than what you know. So I firmly believe that children should go to the education setting that best suits their particular needs. One of the theories that I looked at, or the frameworks I looked at for my thesis, was it was called Allen's sort of fits like a glove flag framework, and it was that kind of going into a place and being able to see yourself there, whether that's, you know, the sort of the tropes of excellence that is the Russell Group University, or is actually a post 1992 university, you know, like Bishop Grove's Test. It is, to me, it's a university that fits some people because it's small, it's nurturing, it's a next step up from perhaps the sort of support that they've had in their secondary schools. And actually, I think if that's a place that fits you, you're going to get the most out of your education there, because you're going to feel comfortable in your own skin and you're going to feel happy. And that's where people thrive, is in a place that they feel comfortable in, not where there's huge pressures to achieve, or where they actually feel this is not for me.
Do you think higher education should be something that the vast majority of people should receive, or do you think actually it shouldn't be one of those things that everyone is encouraged to, you know, aspire to? Because, like, you know, there's, I suppose, like a narrative of like everybody should go to university, and then that you get young people who are like thinking, well, should I do with my life? And then, you know, most of them would probably by default say, you know, I think I need to go to university because that's what I've been told that I should do. What do you think to that narrative?
I think it's wrong, and I think you have to question why we have that narrative. You know, raising of the school leaving age was more to do with, you know, keeping unemployment figures down. You know, it's, you know, if they're still in school, they're not unemployed. And I think universities is the same, that this push to get young people into university was more about, okay, that's another 3 years that they're not unemployed. And I know that sounds a little bit cynical, but I think the other thing, of course, is it's about, you know, X number of our pupils went to university. Are we actually taking the young people out of this equation? In my view, and again, this is something that came out of my PhD work, young people should be getting much better careers advice much earlier on, and should be making those choices much earlier on, in terms of, okay, where do you want to be, and what's the best way that we can get you to where you want to be, and that we're directing them. Whereas I think at the moment it feels almost like they're on this sort of trajectory of, right, we go to school, we're in sixth form now, or college, then we go to university. And I think far more should be done to actually support young people in making the right choices. One of the things that I found was, you know, young people who do, for example, vocational qualifications, level 3, doors are closed in certain universities who won't accept those level 3 qualifications as entry requirements. So straight away, the doors are shut to certain universities and to certain courses. You know, there was a time when I was picking up on my course, a lot of pupils who wanted to do initial teacher education, but they hadn't done the right A-levels because they hadn't been advised properly as to what they needed to do that. So I think far more needs to be done, and that the route young people take is the right route for them, not because, you know, everybody should go to university or everybody should do this. And I think, I mean, obviously the sort of the apprenticeships and the drive towards apprenticeships and degree apprenticeships particularly are giving those options, but I don't think there's been enough investment in them to give them that parity with a degree from a university. So again, I think it's more about not the routes that they're taking, but what happens after that, and whether everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet. And I think at the moment they're not.
So in an ideal world, thinking about education and the role that it can play to transform social mobility, how do you see education sort of, you know, what role does it play, or can it play, to really transform social mobility moving forward from now?
I think it is about, as I say, preparation and making sure that young people know what's out there for them and they know how to get there, and that we have an education system that supports that. I think we've kind of gone back to this very sort of structured national curriculum, a national curriculum that's sort of based around very traditional subjects with very traditional topics and themes, and I'm not sure that it's really giving young people what they need to be aspirational and to think about where they go in the future. I mean, in some cases, again, this is part of my research, and again, it's to do with funding, it's to do with opportunities, to do what's happening in schools. But young people taking options and being sort of forced into certain blocks of options which didn't actually fit what they wanted to do, but because these subjects fit in this block, this is what we have to take. So they're constantly having to adapt their sort of the preference and their ideas based on what's allowed and what they can do. So I think we've got an education system that's not flexible and isn't actually supporting young people in what they can do once they finish.
So what can individual practitioners or individual settings do to actually make that happen?
I'm not sure individual settings have the power to do it, because everywhere is so underfunded at the moment, and short of having lots more staff and lots more money, I'm not sure the problem is with individual settings. I think it's more to do with the decisions that are made beyond that. Settings are doing what they can within the sort of the structures that they're having to work to, in terms of the curriculum that they're having to work with, and the funding processes, because it just gets hugely complicated.
Have you seen any innovative approaches or practice that sort of maybe wouldn't solve the problem but kind of help to move towards what you described?
I think more in the sense of being able to adapt a curriculum to meet an audience, and to sort of, again, it goes back to this, we don't have a one size fits all. And I think sometimes it's about having the confidence to say, well, okay, this is the national curriculum, this is what we're expected to do, but how can we actually mold this to our particular group of students? Part of in my writing of the book, I looked at the experiences of it was around Black Lives Matters, and the experiences of young Black, particularly youths, in America, but also in this country as well, and some of the innovative work that I don't know if you've come across Gloria Ladson-Billings. So she's an American educator, and she spent sort of formative years really thinking about what's wrong with me and why am I not sort of doing as well as I should be in this education system. Subsequently did do well, and then started to look at the young people, and again started to think, what are they doing wrong, and then realize it's not what they're doing wrong, it's what the education system is doing wrong for them, because it was an education system that was tailored to a white audience. We call it a white gaze, so we see everything through our own eyes and how we see things, and that inability to put yourself in the shoes of other children, of other young people. And so she sort of looked at people who were doing well with these young people and what were they doing, and they were creating a curriculum that was designed to meet the needs of these Black children who have a very different sort of outlook, very different upbringing, very different priorities, if you like, and sort of tailored. So she would teach rhyme through rap, because that was their culture. She called it culturally relevant pedagogy, because actually then they could relate to it, they could understand it. So looking at the sort of the reading list, and she made sure that the reading list and the children that were encouraged to read books that actually related to them, that was about young Black people and the challenges that they had, and actually saw these young people far more engaged. So I think we have to take what we're given, because of course we have to sort of follow a curriculum. We have to follow what the government is saying we should be teaching. But that's not to say that we can't adapt and amend that. I say, obviously I work with the early years foundation stage, but I say to my students, you can adapt this as long as you're teaching the principles. You can adapt this to meet the children that you're working with. It shouldn't be about a prescribed thing. It should be about, this is my starting point, but how can I adapt this now to meet the needs of this group of students or this group of students?
So beyond having more resources, what should future governments do in terms of making education the real transformer when it comes to social mobility?
I think they should give teachers the power back. Teachers spend 3, maybe 4 years honing their skills, learning to be teachers, but I think we have a government that don't put a lot of trust in those teachers, and I think that they should be less prescriptive. I think they should allow teachers to, and there are a lot of creative teachers out there, I know that, but I think that we should have the confidence as teachers to know our audience and to do what we think is right for our particular group of pupils, our setting. Bernstein, he particularly talked about this sort of language and codes, and how we've kind of fallen into this is a setting, this is a school that's in an area of sort of low socioeconomic status, and so we should be teaching the children this and this, whereas those sort of more affluent areas, children were given a lot more autonomy. They were a lot more creative teaching, a lot more funding in some instances, and it was all kind of back to front. He talked about this sort of elaborated code and a restricted code. So children from the sort of poorer settings, you just have this access to a restricted code, whereas the children from better off settings have both elaborate and restricted codes, so they can kind of fit into either setting. But actually we should be, I think, letting all our children see what's out there for them, and being able to mould and shape our teaching to suit those individual needs. But to me, it's about, we've got so much fear around Ofsted. If we're seen to not be towing the line and doing what we should be doing, then Ofsted are going to frown upon it. Well, I don't think that's the case. I think that so long as you are ticking those boxes, but in a creative way, and you are sort of moulding what you're doing towards your audience, then that's what we should be doing.
So obviously I would recommend your book to people who are listening or watching this, and I'm going to add the information in the description. But what reading would you recommend anybody who's interested in education, and maybe particularly when it comes to social mobility?
Well, I mean, Bourdieu is your starting point. Absolutely, it's quite heavy going, but that is kind of cultural capital, social capital, all of that. Oh, you put me on the spot now. I feel like I should have done my. There's a lot of literature out there on social mobility, and no, I'm sorry, you've just put me on the.
That's absolutely fine. What we can do is, if you could pass
I
on
really will, because I
list.
just think I've got shelves full at home. It's like I really can't pull those names.
That's absolutely fine. So if you have to sum up in one sentence in terms of your advice for practitioners based on what you know from writing your books and also from your research into social mobility, what would that be?
I just think I would say, do you know what? Have confidence in yourself. Have the courage of your convictions. Practitioners, they are trained. They know what they're doing, and I think I do think we have a government who are overly prescriptive. But I think I would say to practitioners, have the confidence in your abilities and be creative and do what you know is right for your children.
Brilliant. It's been absolutely amazing speaking with you. And so thank you. And we'll obviously, as I said, add the list of items to the description.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you, Ali.
Thank you.